Welcome back, folks. My name is Cameron.
And my name is Quiva.
And we're delighted to have you back with us for the next few hours as we explore Brussels, European politics, and everything Europe. We've just had our Hemicycle hangout. Quiva, what did you think of it?
I thought it was a really cool event, Cameron. I think it's so interesting to see the inner workings and the behind the scenes of the European Parliament. It's crazy to think of the decisions, present and past, that have been made in that very room.
Absolutely, Quiva. And I think decisions there is such a key word. And I suppose we think about decisions and the impact that that can have on young people's lives. And this festival, Eye on the Edge, is all about how young people can come together and give them a platform for their voice through art, through panel discussions, workshops, through shaping the future of Europe as well. And Quiva, we've got a really interesting event happening this afternoon called Youth Voices for the Future of Europe. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, Cameron. So Youth Voices for Future of Europe is happening at 3:15, and I am really excited for it. It's a chance for young people like you, like me, like everyone at home to have their say and get their chance to express their views and share their ideas. There's also going to be an opportunity from the European Parliament Liaison Office in Dublin, who are going to ask people who attend that panel discussion to send in a video and have their voice heard on what they expect from the Conference of the Future of Europe and what their views on it are. So if you want to find out more information from that, make sure you log in. And while it's really important that we talk about our future and our shaping Europe, it's really important as well to look back on our past.
Absolutely, Quiva. And there's such an incredible event happening at 4:15 called Information Revolution. And this is going to take us through key historical moments in Europe and how communication technologies played a role in these. And how can we learn from the past to create change for today, tomorrow, and into the future. Take social media, for example. How can we look at how social media has exploded over the last number of years and how will that influence historical changes that the youth of today create tomorrow for ourselves. The last event, folks, that we have that we're going to talk about is the one that's happening directly after you get to speak to the lovely Quiva and myself, and that's multilingualism. Quiva, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so multilingualism in the EU, united in diversity, is coming on straight after this. And I think it's really important, again, to discuss the role that multilingualism has in the European Parliament, because it is essential for a rich and democratic debate. So this event is going to be brought to you by interpreters, translators from the European Parliament, who are going to tell you about the role that multilingualism has in the European Parliament and also give you an idea and an insight into some job opportunities that are there for you guys at home. So make sure you tune in directly after this event.
So definitely not an event to miss, folks. And an event all about diversity, which is close to the hearts of the Eye on the Edge team in terms of diverse voices and making sure that we give young people a platform for their voices. So, folks, we hope that you enjoy the next few hours of exploring Brussels, exploring European politics, and exploring how the youth voice shapes and creates and changes that every day.
So make sure you tune in, sit back, relax, and enjoy multilingualism in the EU, united in diversity.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our panel discussion on multilingualism in the EU. My name is Marco. I am an interpreter in the Slovenian language unit at the European Parliament, but I will be your moderator for today. We'll be covering topics like what it's like to work as a translator or an interpreter at the European Parliament, what languages mean to us, and much more. But of course, we'd mostly like to hear from you, our audience. If you have anything you'd like to ask our translators, our interpreters, please don't hesitate. Just type it in the chat and we'll include it in our discussions. Maybe also mention where you're coming from to keep things interesting. Now, to kick things off, I'd like to ask our panelists for a brief introduction. Maybe tell us your name, where you work, and what languages you use in your work. Good.
Thank you, Marco. Good afternoon, everyone in Galway. I'm Gerard O'Dine. I'm originally from County Waterford on the south coast of Ireland, but currently living in Luxembourg, where I work as a translator for the Irish unit at the European Parliament. I did spend a couple of years studying in Galway, so I'm delighted that Galway are hosting this year's Eye on the Edge, and congratulations to the whole team. I primarily translate from English into Irish, but I also dabble a bit with German and Spanish. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rujita?
Hello, everybody. I'm really glad to be here. So my name is Ružica. I'm Croatian, and I'm working for the Croatian Translation Unit in Luxembourg, in the European Parliament. I'm translating from English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and German, in that order, into my mother tongue, Croatian.
Amazing. Thank you. Louise?
Hi, Marco. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Louise, and I'm an interpreter in the English booth at the European Parliament. I work in Brussels. I grew up in Scotland. I don't know if some of you can pick up on my accent. Some people do, some people don't. I work into English from French. I work into Spanish. I work into Spanish from English, and I work from Spanish into English as well.
Amazing. And last and definitely not least, Dace.
Thank you, Marco. My name is Dace. I'm from the Latvian language unit, and I interpret from English, French, German, and Russian into Latvian. And as the case may be, if there is a Latvian member of the parliament who wants to express him or herself in Latvian, I'd be the one who'd interpret him or her into English, so you guys can understand.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you. Now, before questions from our audience start rolling in, maybe you'd like to describe your typical day for us, Ružica?
It's actually a little bit difficult question because I wouldn't say there is a very typical day in the life of a translator. You see, we do very different tasks that go from, let's say, classical translation, which we do at our computers and using different CAT tools and studio. Then we revise texts from our colleagues, but also from our mentees, the trainees. We also sometimes record audio content, for example, flash news, podcasts. We participate in language courses. In my case, it's Portuguese. We have our thematic group meetings or our unit meetings. So it's really very, very diverse. Every day is different. And that's what makes it interesting as well.
Thank you. Dace, what's your day like as an interpreter in the European Parliament?
Yeah, I think we have even less of a routine in our work. I mean, we could easily start work at 8 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock at night for the night plenary, for example, and continue on to midnight and then crawl home after the curfew hour, because now obviously in COVID times, there is such a thing. But yeah, and the topics that we cover in the meetings, they are very varied. They're starting from all kinds of financial instruments, for example, over-the-counter derivatives. Don't ask me what that is, but you know, there is such a thing, up until, I don't know, specific species of fish. And for that reason, we need to do a lot of preparation work on top of the meetings. So the day is really, really varied there. Don't think there is such a thing as a normal day.
Sounds amazing. But you mentioned COVID. Gerud, has COVID had an impact on your professional life as a translator? And if so, what's changed? What's different?
Yeah, it really, really has. And, you know, we're feeling it every day in many different ways. I will just say, you know, to kind of make the distinction, one of the distinctions between interpretation and translation is, I think a lot of people who aren't too familiar with it think that interpretation is merely translating on the spot and using your mouth instead of your fingers to write it out. And I think when it comes to the pandemic and how it affected our lives, myself and Ružica's lives as translators, and the other two girls' lives as interpreters, shows the many distinctions, one of the many differences between the two. I think for us as translators, primarily, yes, it did involve just taking our work home with us. And still, you know, using much the same software and just working from home and getting used to that. It was challenging, but not perhaps as difficult as it would be for the interpreters who are traveling quite a bit with their work. Perhaps they're in the booth, they're meeting people more frequently every day. So it probably wasn't as difficult for us as translators to adapt. But that being said, of course, we miss many things about working in the office, certainly the social interactions, which are good for those personal connections. We need those personal connections to help enjoy ourselves at work, going for a coffee or going for lunch and having a catch up. But also when it comes to those minute grammatical questions that we might have, where we can't simply knock on the door of someone and go, just 1 second, may I ask you this? Is this whatever it is? Get your response and get back to work. It's a little bit more difficult to facilitate that at the moment. So we are certainly looking forward to get back into the office and being sociable and getting those questions answered that bit quicker.
I can imagine. Now, Louise, obviously travel has been severely limited in COVID times, but is that the only thing that's changed for interpreters, or have there been other changes?
Well, it is one of the big changes since in normal times, interpreters travel to Strasbourg at least once a month, sometimes twice. Then there's all the other kinds of travel we have as well when we go away on these exotic things called missions, which is rather James Bond-esque, another perk of working at the Parliament where you could really go anywhere in the world. But it's not just that. In COVID times, the Parliament's adapted. So we have speakers connecting remotely. We're in the facilities. Not only that, but usually interpreters will usually work 3 to a booth, 3 per language in the same soundproof booth working. But in COVID times, of course, that has not been possible because you're not supposed to share a confined space. So we're each in our own booth, which means we've had to come up with new ways to communicate or help each other when we're working, since interpretation is all about teamwork. So we've had to adapt, but we're very much hoping to getting back to the status quo.
Yeah, we all are, I imagine. The questions have started to come in. I'll just read one out. It's from Andres from Spain. He's a bachelor student in translation and interpreting. What are the steps to get involved in this field, and what is it like as an EU interpreter to work? What's your everyday like? I think we've answered that question, but maybe, Ružica, you can talk about what do you need to do to become a translator at the European Parliament?
Hello, Andres from Spain. Yes, I will cover maybe the translation part, and then maybe one of the interpreters can cover the interpretation part. Well, in order to qualify to become a translator for the European Parliament, you basically have to have a university degree of at least 3 years. It can be actually in any field. So you do not have to have the classical, let's say, pathway of studying languages. However, it's extremely important that you really have a very good knowledge, thorough knowledge of your mother tongue, meaning grammar and everything, plus 2 other official EU languages at a very good level. Those are the basic requirements in order to apply. Yes, for the translators part.
Okay, thank you. Bate, would you like to talk to us about what's required to become an interpreter? And maybe your personal professional path, how you landed in the booth?
Sure. Unlike translators, I think for interpretation, you do have to have a specific study time devoted specifically to conference interpreting. It can be, I believe, 4 years of bachelor's degree, or it has to be at least 1 year of postgraduate studies that would qualify you to become a conference interpreter. And once you have done that, there are 2 ways to go. You can become a freelancer, or you can try for a staff position. I think that's probably much more difficult. That's EPSO and the whole official recruitment procedure. But to become a freelancer, you have to pass also interpretation exam. There is a specific page where you can read up on all the details about it. But same as for translation, you need at least 3 languages, including your mother tongue, to give it a start. But I mean, good luck, Andres. I really, keep my fingers crossed for you. We need fresh blood. As to me, I am a rather classic linguist. Let's say I had 4 years of bachelor's studies in English language and literature, then 2 master's degree in languages, and one of them in conference interpreting. So that's how I'm here.
Amazing. The questions are rolling in. Gerud, there's a question about your job in general. What do you love about your job? What do you like the most about your job? And are there any aspects you might not like that much about being a translator?
Well, that's a pretty big question there, Marco, but I'll do my best. I would say what I like about the job, well, first of all, working for the Parliament, if I can talk about that. I see every day myself in the documents I translate, I see the work that the Parliament does in terms of workers' rights across the Union. And so it's kind of no surprise really then that the European Parliament has to kind of demonstrate those values themselves in how they treat their own employees. And I do feel like the European Parliament does look after us. I feel like it's such a comfortable work environment. And I always feel like there's so many ways that they take care of us, and there's so many freedoms associated with the job. So I do love that. I do love that. Every couple of weeks I'm learning something new about how they treat the employees here, and it's always fantastic. So that's great. But also when it comes to actually, something that's so key for me in the documents I translate is the diversity of subjects handled. Sometimes we can be dealing with maybe meetings, minutes from meetings, but other times we're looking at legislation. But again, as I said, we're looking at what the work that the European Parliament is doing and getting a deeper understanding of what an important union this is, looking at women's rights, workers' rights, as I said, looking at refugees, and also getting kind of a sneak peek into the major questions that are coming down the road. I read a lot of text, or translating a lot of text at the moment about artificial intelligence, which looks like it's going to be, it's already quite big, but as time goes by, it's going more interesting. So I feel like I'm learning so much about just our society in general. I feel like, as I said, I'm getting a sneak peek into the future, what we're going to be dealing with as a society coming down along the line. And that's a privilege to be learning that, to seeing the great work the Parliament does, and to be learning more about our society. It's fantastic.
Thank you. That was really amazing. I'm sure that our audience would like to hear from an interpreter as well. Louise, what do you like about your job?
It is a very big question. I think that Garud really did a good job summing up some of the main aspects. I think working for the Parliament is doing work that's meaningful. You really are working to represent a union, since it's the only directly elected institution, and that's very gratifying to be able to work with that on a daily basis, from really huge meetings like the plenary, but also much smaller meetings when you maybe got 2 MEPs working one-to-one, trying to iron out issues they have around a particular piece of draft legislation, is also super gratifying. And there's the perk of all the interesting people that you get to meet, the travel in normal times, just that feeling of being connected to something that's bigger than yourself, that's working for everyone. Is there something I don't like? Well, sometimes I don't like getting up really early to catch an early flight, but this is hardly a real problem.
Agreed. Now, Gerud mentioned AI. Ružica, as a translator, what do you think of AI? Is that something that you see as a threat to your job, or more like a tool to help you work better?
For now, it's only a tool, and I do hope that it stays that way. I mean, it's something that, while we are working, we are relying to one degree or another, depending on the type of the text, on the machine translation. It's something that really speeds up the translation procedure and allows us also to maybe focus more on texts that we deem maybe a little bit more important, but in which the machine translation doesn't necessarily give the best results. And on the other hand, it also gives us the opportunity, as I already mentioned, to maybe focus on some other tasks, like doing the audio content, also the citizens' language, meaning editing our texts in the way to make them as approachable, as user-friendly for the audience, meaning for the Croatians in general, for example, in my case. Do I think that it will one day replace our job, the machine translation? I really don't think so, because it can be actually super tricky, and I think that Geroid will probably agree, because machine translation really requires a thorough revision. It gives you results which sometimes seem impeccable. You're sometimes like, oh my God, this is even better than what I would have done. But then you go into details, then you actually look up the terminology that it gives you, and you realize, oh my God, this is really a completely false result. So it can be tricky. It's super helpful, but we always have to be very, very careful about it. It's a great asset for now, for the translators. Yeah.
Thank you. And that's it. Do interpreters think of AI? Do interpreters see AI as a threat? Or do you use AI in your daily life, at work?
Oh, I wish there was an AI right beside me when I have that specific species of fish coming up. But no, I don't think there has been much of artificial intelligence used so far in interpreting. And I don't think it will replace us. It could. I would imagine that it is very helpful in a mundane, everyday communication. But when it gets to nuances, into all kinds of, deep things, I don't think it's going to ever replace us. Or at least I hope so. Maybe I'm all wishful thinking. What do you, Lise, think about that?
Louise, do you want to come in?
Well, we'll have to see how it goes. Who knows, right? Who knows what the future holds? But I would tend to agree with Dace on this one.
And there's another question for you, Louise. What language is most commonly spoken at the European Parliament on the side of the MEPs, of course? Do they usually speak a foreign language, or do they speak their own mother tongues? What's the situation there?
Well, it varies greatly. It very much depends on the setting, since there are so many different meetings, from the groups to the committees to the smaller groups of rapporteurs getting together to discuss legislation. There's a lot of English spoken, but equally there's a lot of MEPs who choose to speak their mother tongue or a different foreign language, which is not English, which I think for an interpreter, I don't know for Dace, is always a bit of a surprise, as if we had forgotten that they can also speak other languages really well.
Thank you. That was a question from Emma, by the way. But if we take a step back, there are lots of young people listening to us, and they're wondering if this is the right career path for them or not. Could you talk a little bit about that, Gerard? How come you decided to be a translator? What led you down this path? And would you recommend it to our audience?
Yeah, certainly. I think, it's something that happens to a lot of people in school, where we develop an interest in languages. And, we realize that we just enjoy speaking languages and the social implications of that. But of course, within learning languages, there's a whole wide array of careers that you can take up, be it in translation, or be it teaching, or be it simply working, moving to another country and doing some kind of work through a different language. There's many different things you can do. So for me, I think I did start in that same way, where I knew I loved languages. I knew I always enjoyed speaking languages, and I always had kind of fantasized about moving to a different country and speaking those languages and improving my ability. I had a pretty diverse path to translation. I've only been translating for a number of years, but I worked as a tour guide for a while in the Rocky Mountains in Canada, where I spoke some languages with guests who would come there, so that was fantastic. I taught in summer camps, Gaeltacht summer camps in Ireland. I lectured in sociolinguistics, so I've been very lucky that I've been able to try a wide, diverse array of jobs that involve languages. But coming to translation in the end, really, it's something I always had in the back of my head. I did think I enjoy it and that I'd be good at it. And then luckily for me, I had a close friend of mine who works here before me, who I could speak to and ask questions. And he gave me a lot of advice about things that I'd enjoy and that I didn't enjoy. So that will be, I guess, a recommendation for anyone who's listening who might be interested, of course, in a career in languages, be it as translator, interpreter, or other, is to just ask those questions, send emails to people who work in these companies. I mean, there's no harm in doing it. I'm sure they won't feel too put out. A lot of people enjoy talking about their job. So just take that step just to help you yourself kind of get it more firm in your head. If it is a career that might interest you, ask those questions. It'll stand you well.
Amazing, thank you. Rujita, I've got a question from Matteo from Italy. He wants to know, for example, what degrees do you have? Because you mentioned the whole plethora of languages. Do you have diplomas in all these languages? How does that work? And are there any schools at the European level that are recommended to become a translator?
Very interesting question. Thank you, Marco, and thank you, Matteo. Okay, so no, I actually studied only English and French. I'm a pre-Bologna program, so I have this 4 years bachelor's degree from the University of Zagreb. In the course of my studies, I also I got 2 scholarships. So I studied for a year in the States and also for a semester at the Sorbonne University in Paris. But when it comes to other languages, let's say in the case of Spanish, I'm a little bit self-taught because I was always very much interested into everything that has to do with the South America, meaning all the, salsa and reggaeton, but also I was really exposed ever since I was just a little kid to watching all these soap operas on TV, which turned out to be very useful. And when I came here, it was actually 10 years ago, came to Luxembourg. I was one of the first translators to work for the Croatian translation unit. The European Parliament is investing in us, in translators. So it's paying language courses. So basically I had already, let's say, average knowledge of Spanish. So I got it's not a university degree, it's a course. It's just a linguistic course. So from Spanish and after that German, it takes about 5 or 6 years in order to finish a course in a language here at the parliament. So after my Spanish, I also got my German, and now I'm somewhere, I hope so, approaching the end of my Portuguese learning path. But yes, when you say, is there any school that would be recommended, university? I wouldn't say so. I mean, even as I already said, as a translator, you don't have to have a degree in languages. And this can be actually even super useful if you have a degree in law, if you have a degree in some other field, because those are the profiles that are often very much in demand among translators, because we are translating such a big diversity of texts. And very often we have to know, Dace was talking about all these financial terms. And it's just such a huge asset if we have a colleague who studied, for example, economics or something like that, but also learned the languages, either is bilingual or had a chance to study in a different country, or simply was very motivated and picked up the language by himself or herself. So there is no one recipe. Really, you can have so many different paths. If you're interested in becoming a translator, yes, many doors are open for you.
Thank you. I think that's very important for our audience to know that there are many, many paths to becoming a translator or interpreter. There's a question from Celia from Luxembourg. I think that's the question exactly for you, Dace. What are some of the coolest or most unusual things you have interpreted in your professional life?
Oh, that is a good one. That is a good one. There have been a few, but I remember clearly I think it was a few years back, well, more than maybe a few, but let's not be, punctual there, that I came here and we had to interpret an event for the Sakharov Prize. Sorry. And that was one of the first ones. And the whole hemicycle, which I think you guys had a visitor hang around right now before this transmission, it was all converted into a huge stage with spotlights shining and camera crews and all kinds of wires and gadgets in the corridors. And it was always scripts and music and everything. And there was also the invited guests. And one of them was Michael Gorbachev. And that for me was a very big thing. Because me growing up in Latvia was perestroika, it was the renewal of independence. It was very, very important. So I remember being there, seeing him down there on the stage, and then interpreting him. That was a big thing, really.
Did you interpret him from Russian?
Yes, I did.
Amazing, amazing. Grud, how about you? What's the most unusual or the coolest text you've worked on recently?
I feel like translation is slightly less cool than interpretation in that regard. I don't want to knock it too much, but it's not as perhaps engaging the same way when you're around these people in that manner. Cool texts. I feel like I'm more likely to think of texts that I found difficult that stick in my head. I remember we had a document a couple of months ago, and we were all, I think it was maybe lately arrived late. But we had a document to translate about fine arts. I don't know, Rusa, if you remember that. It was for a museum display and it used this very flowery language, which we're not perhaps used to. And, it wasn't just straightforward. It was like, this is an image of a duck swimming gently upstream and is filled with a sense of joie de vivre and all this. And I just remember that being a very difficult text. It never made me miss legislation and boring run the stuff more. So that was a difficult one. But a cool one, I'll have to come back to you on that, Marco. I'll let you know.
Thank you very much. that was really good. Louise, a question from Alejandro. Did you set any objectives in your professional life in order to become an interpreter for the Parliament or for the institutions in general?
Thanks, Marco, and thanks, Alejandro. When you prepare for the freelance test at the EU, it's a bit of a mammoth undertaking. The tests are not impossible, but the standard is high. So you have to practice consistently. I often like to say when trying to achieve something, little and often is the best way to go. Before working for the institutions, I did a lot of volunteer work as an interpreter, which is also very fulfilling and is a great way to get some practice under your belt, to meet other colleagues. So that's a really good way to go about it, to look for organizations that need volunteers. There are a number of different places where you can look for that. And that's a good way to set about it. At the end of the day, you need to practice. Being an interpreter is like being an athlete. I mean, not that I'm in any way like an athlete, but you need to train. That's the best way to get ready for any kind of professional endeavor.
Thank you. Sounds like solid advice. Ružica, I'll do you a solid and I'll combine two questions for you. First, a question from Natasha from Lisbon. It's a straightforward question. Do you have any traineeship programs at the translation unit? And then from Andres, are you, because as a translator, I imagine you translate all sorts of text. Are you specialized in any field and then take text from that field only, or are you expected to do everything?
Let me first answer Natasha's question. Hello, Natasha from Lisbon. Yes, we actually take pride in offering, I would say, really good and maybe even generous traineeships. So there are 5-month-long traineeships, which are the paid ones. So it's a Schumann traineeship at the translation unit. So each translation unit actually every 5 months gets 2 new trainees. What are the conditions? Conditions are to be a national of one of the EU member states. You have to be at least 18 years old, and you also have to hold a university degree of at least 3 years. Plus, beside your mother tongue, you also have to have a very good knowledge of one other official EU language. And the university degree can also be just like for the translators, it can be in some other field. And I would really, really encourage everybody who is listening to this and who fulfills the conditions and who has aspirations to become a translator one day to apply for these traineeships. I think at some point you will also see the link in the chat. Our moderators will take care of that because it kind of gives you the feeling of what it's like to work in the translation unit, because the trainees, when they come to us, each of them is assigned a mentor. They go through a series of trainings and so on, but then they really start translating the text that we are translating. In the beginning, it's of course the texts of a more simple nature, and then they go to the more complicated ones. And of course, it all depends on the personal development and the personal involvement. The second question from Andres, do we specialize? Actually, we do. We have a couple of thematic groups. We call them thematic groups, and each translator is assigned to one of these groups. And these groups are actually divided. They cover different types of committees. So, for example, I will be in the thematic group which deals, for example, with the climate protection. And this means that whenever we have a text which deals with the climate protection, they will go to the members of my group. This, however, changes when we have a huge workload, because then everybody is expected to be able to translate texts from any of the thematic groups. There is some sort of specialization, even though most of us, at least, for example, in my unit, we all studied languages. We have this really classical linguistic profile. And hence, this kind of specialization is actually really good. Yeah.
Thank you. That was very exhaustive. Dr. How about interpreters? Does the interpreting service offer traineeships? And do we specialize in any field, or can you be assigned to any meeting at all times?
I don't think we have traineeships, Marco, but we do have visits from the universities that have conference interpreting studies that are in any way linked to the European Commission or the European Parliament. They have top-up studies, so they could come here after finishing the course to get a feeling of what it is like to be interpreting here in the institutions. We even had one now, albeit per Zoom because it's the COVID times again, now this winter, and where we talked to students from the University of Latvia who are studying interpreting right now. So that's one possibility. Talking about the specialization, nope, we don't specialize too much. I mean, it all comes over us in one big avalanche, you know. I mean, members of the parliament might be changing the topic as quickly as that, and you have to be able to keep up. So even if you all of a sudden, if you studied economy, you are being put into the committee that deals with economic issues, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're talking about economy all the time. So no real. Wouldn't you agree, Lise? We don't really have any specialization, not like that.
Louise, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I would tend to agree. You end up specializing in institutional affairs and the procedure of the parliament. You end up understanding how parliaments work, how these things get done, and that's interesting too. But you don't have to go into it with a particular specialization in medical law or anything like that.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question from Emma, especially for Gerud, and I'll read it out. In Ireland, she says, we don't really practice translating texts when learning languages in school as much as the other European nations. They're focusing more on literature. That's her experience. Was it more difficult for you to start translation and interpretation compared to your international colleagues? So what's your personal experience?
I'm not too sure of the distinctions like across the member states with regards to like second language instruction in that regard. Emma's right that, I mean, there isn't that much emphasis on translation in second level and at primary level in Ireland. But I think that's, I do think that it's fairly common for other languages as well, that, you know, when you get to university and you really need to up your game, that translating text is brought into it because it is that bit more demanding. For myself, I come from a bilingual family, so I was always comfortable with my level of Irish where I went. So that wasn't as much of an issue for me. But then, of course, you know, when I went to university, I think you can speak a language very fluently, be very confident in it, and at the same time, you know nothing about that language when it comes to the brass tacks of grammar and certain way things are done. I mean, we're always looking in the dictionary and at the standard for clues. So I would say that I would love to see a bit more translation, a bit more emphasis on translation and creative writing in Irish, in the Irish education system. But I think at third level, I think when it kicks in, the standard is there. And I mean, there's many courses that people can do now who are interested in perhaps becoming a translator at the Parliament that are pretty tough. They're pretty exhaustive courses. So they really do push you through your paces, and I think give an excellent grounding for what it means to be working at this level at the Parliament.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Louise, a question from Brazil, from Ozzy. What's the maximum number of languages that an interpreter can have? Is there a maximum number, or can you just go on adding languages ad infinitum?
Well, boa tarde, or bom dia, I guess, if it's Brazil. I suppose, you know, there's your average standard, maybe like 100 languages is the threshold. No, I'm only joking, there's no maximum. The average for interpreters is 5 languages, including your first language, I think that's, if I'm not mistaken. For translators, I think it's usually a bit more, but we do have some interpreter colleagues who work with up to 9, which is really impressive. But the lower threshold is 3 passive languages, or 2 what we call passive. So you work from the language into your first language, and a retour, which is when you work back from your first language into that second active language.
Okay, so I guess once you become an interpreter, you start adding more and more languages, or do people just come in with 9 languages? Louise?
The great thing also about working for the interpretation service at the Parliament is that, as with translation, as Rujica mentioned, you have a continued professional development afterwards, which is essentially that you keep adding languages. So you've got someone in my position. I came in with 3, if you include my Spanish retour, and I'm working now on a different language to add as well. So the idea is that you just keep going. So it's important, I would say, to pick languages that you're interested in, the languages whose culture you're interested in for whatever country they're spoken in. That's super important, and let that guide you. That's official EU languages, by the way, though we do have many colleagues who also work from other languages, such as Datse, who has Russian too, even if it's not an official EU language.
Thank you. What about translators, Ružica? Is there a maximum number that you're allowed to work from, or are you encouraged to learn languages? How does that work?
Of course, there is no maximum number. It's pretty much similar to everything Louise said. I think most of us, especially us who are coming, for example, I'm from Croatia, and we are very, very monolingual country, you know, so it's kind of hard to come already, especially if you're, let's say, joining the parliament right after the university or something like that. It's hard to already come with three, yes, but 4, 5, and so on languages. But you are expected in the course of time to add those languages. Of course, it's never, if you remember in the beginning when I was saying all the languages that I speak, and I said in that order, of course, the last language that, for example, now that I'm learning Portuguese or even my German, it will never be the level of my English or my French, which I studied. However, I am perfectly capable of translating from these languages because we do go through these trainings and through 6 years of learning the languages. And yes, we are very much encouraged, but sometimes it's not even encouragement because for most of us, this is a passion as well. We really like languages. From my perspective, I love doing what I'm doing. Learning languages is just, extra languages is just the bonus of this work.
Thank you. What was your personal experience, Datse? Did you come in with all the languages that you currently have, or have you learned the language thanks to the European Parliament? And if so, what was your experience learning with the help of the European Parliament?
Yeah, definitely. No, I didn't have all these languages when I started way back when, and I'm not specifying when. I did come in with some, well, English obviously was always, I think, in point, and I learned German here and French as well. Russian I had to brush up on in order to add it as a language. And I had to go through, like, I had to have all these 3 major languages so that I could get to the one that I really want. I'm studying Italian now, yay! I love Italy, and I'm, you know, who knows, I might move there at some point. So I've gotten to the fun part, yes, indeed.
Amazing. And Louise, how does one choose a language? I think you spoke before about learning languages and choosing the right language. What would you suggest to our audience? How do they go about choosing a language that they want to learn in order to be interpreters?
Well, I think it's about choosing a language that piques your curiosity, but also that you think will be spoken a lot. That's why so many colleagues learn German, because German is a language that's really widely spoken. It's spoken a lot at the parliament. And also I think speaking German is a bit of a superpower. I don't know if Gerud can attest to this, but I don't have German myself, so I am sort of not in that clique. Just give me 10 years or so. But I would say you got to pick something that you like and where you're interested in the culture and that you think is something you'd like to keep learning throughout your life, since after all, that's the thing with languages, they're not static. We're always adding to them and learning new things. That's what I would say anyway.
Thank you. Gerud, you were called out, so to speak. Is speaking German a superpower?
Oh yeah, speaking German gets you a lot of places. And I mean, I think, as I said, this is about multilingualism, and I spoke earlier about like working for the parliament and the many benefits. The emphasis that is placed on multilingualism on every level, not just in regards to interpreters and translators. You know, everyone is encouraged to improve their language skills, and that's fantastic because it just adds to the diversity of our workplace and adds to our ability to communicate with one another. So that is fantastic. I'm studying French at the moment, which is, I think, quite unusual because generally a lot of people come here with French or they get French pretty quickly, but French was always on the back burner for me. And it's fantastic because, of course, I'm developing professionally. I'll need it professionally, but also, you know, I can order a croissant at the boulangerie and I can do many basic things. I live in Luxembourg. As soon as the pandemic's over, I'm going to be traveling all around French-speaking countries, and I'm very much looking forward to that, and I want to be prepared. And the fact that I get to take these classes during work time, privilege. It's an absolute privilege, and I'm very, very thankful for that opportunity.
Amazing. Thank you. Everybody, that's all the time we have for today. Our time is up. Dear audience, I hope this discussion was as interesting for you as it was for me personally. I learned a lot. Thank you, Dace, Rujita, Louise, Rod. Thank you for being here. And I'll see you around. That's all from our side. Thank you. Bye-bye.